Well, good afternoon or evening or whatever you call 4:30 in the afternoon in Germany. We call it afternoon back in Tennessee. This session is actually going to be two sessions. We're going to have 20 minutes, then you're going to have 10 minutes for beer, and then we're going to have another 45 minutes. So, this is 10 things in Active Directory that can screw up your desktop and application virtualization efforts and how to fix them. Oh. There we go.
What way to destroy man?
One way to exploit it.
Well, about me, my name's Webster, Carl Webster. Everyone just calls me Webster. And if you can't tell by my accent, I'm based out of Nashville, Tennessee. And that's one of the things I liked about coming to Europe. This is actually only my second time out of the United States. I was at Synergy Barcelona just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm really enjoying this trip to Germany and listening to all the people, because man, y'all just talk funny around here. Because we don't have any accents where I come from.
No.
All right, I'm an independent consultant. I specialize in three things. I do Citrix, Active Directory, and I do some technical writing. I've been a CTP since 2010. I've actually been working with Citrix products since late 1989, early 1990, somewhere around there. The company I used to do at Dev 4, we were one of the very first beta testers of the very first Citrix product back in late 89, early 90. And I've actually been in IT since before probably most people in this room were born. I got started in September 1977 in IT. I have run the website, carlwebster.com, the accidental Citrix admin for those who find themselves supporting Citrix accidentally or involuntarily. And I make myself very hidden on the internet. My email address is webster@carlwebster.com, and Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, everything's just Carl Webster, so it's pretty hard to find me. So you're not scrambling around trying to take pictures of all the slides, writing notes and stuff like that. At the end of the second presentation, if I've got my time zone conversion right back to Tennessee, there'll be a PDF available of this entire presentation. All my notes, all the research, everything is in the PDF, and you'll be able to get it for free. So, what are we going to cover today? Domain and forest functional levels, sites and services. We're going to talk about subnets, and then we're going to talk about DNS reverse lookup zones. That should take us to the first break. Then y'all can go get beer, come back, and then we'll start talking about global catalog servers, connection objects, duplicate DNS entries, Orphan domain controllers, authoritative time server, domain controller DNS IP configuration settings, and Active Directory design guidelines. Now about these 10 things. I've been working with Active Directory since July 2001, and in the last 11, 12 years, however long that's been, I've done well over 100 Active Directory migrations and assessments. I've done Active Directory migrations for, the largest one I did was for a company that covered 6 continents, 18 time zones, and 30-something countries. The largest one I've done. And in doing all of these, what you find out is a lot of times things just don't go right. Either you can't even do the test migration, or sometimes when you go to do the actual migration, things are just screwy. They're screwed up, they don't work, and the customer's breathing down your neck. And so what I have found out over the years in doing all of these migrations and assessments is that almost every Active Directory network I have ever seen has at least 15 or 17 of these 10 things. In other words, everyone has these. I've only ever seen, in all the Active Directory networks that I have been involved in, I've only seen one that was perfect. And that was this summer when I did an assessment for someone who was moving to XenApp 6.5, bringing in Zen Desktop, and also AppV. Well, what they had done is they had broken away from their parent company, and they did a greenfield Active Directory. They did no migration. They set up everything from scratch. 2008 R2 from scratch. After they got everything done, they brought Microsoft Consulting in for a month. So by the time I came in this summer, my AD assessment was 1 sentence long. This is the cleanest, most perfect, well-maintained Active Directory network I have seen in my career. It was a one-sentence AD assessment. It's the only one I've ever seen. Now also, if you want to, we can play the battle of battling TechNet and MSDN articles, because there's been a lot of things that have been written about Active Directory since Active Directory, they first started writing about it in, I believe, 98, 99, somewhere in there. The problem is that Microsoft, kind of like Citrix, they changed things along the way. And what Microsoft said to do back in 98, 99, 2000 for designing, architecting, and building an Active Directory infrastructure is not what they tell you to do today. But there are people who still were taught back in 99 and 2000, and they never have learned anything new. They have not learned any of the changes that Microsoft has made in Active Directory. So what I did, just to make sure that all this information is accurate and up to date, I gave this slide deck to several Active Directory MVPs, other directory services experts, and had them look at everything. Analyze all my slides, all my research and everything. So what you're seeing has been proven by all the MVPs who've looked at all this. So all this information is accurate. Yes?
Did they all give you the same answer? Did they all give you the same answer, or is it like, you know, often when you ask 10 experts, you'll get 15 different answers?
No, every one of them gave me the exact same answers. Every one of them. One of the directory services experts runs one of the largest Active Directory environments in the United States. One of them, who believe it or not is just turned 25 and has written 4 books on Active Directory. You know, so that kid, old enough also to be my son. You know,
I was a lot of spare time.
Yeah, I had lots of spare time. That's right. Okay, so when I go out to do an assessment, the first thing I'm going to look for is I'm going to look at the domain and force functional levels. The reason this is important is because when most people do an Active Directory implementation, they never touch it again. They don't make any changes, they just leave it alone. And that's the worst thing you can possibly do. A couple of reasons for that is if you don't change things in Active Directory, you're not able to take advantage of enhanced security protocols or enhanced encryption. You're not able to take advantage of the number of objects that can be placed in a security group. You're not able to take advantage of enhancements in replication or enhancements in how the Knowledge Consistency Checker, or KCC, generates replication topology. So when I go out and I look at a 2003 Active Directory environment, by default, the domain functional level, force functional level, or DFL, FFL, are set to the absolute minimum necessary to support the first 2003 domain controller in an environment. And the reason this is bad, at the 2000 DFL, FFL, you can have no more than 5,000 security objects in a security group. For most Zen Desktop and Zen App deployments I've seen, there are more than 5,000 users. And then also, one of the enhancements for going to 2003 or higher is that the security group objects are now what's called linked value replication flag. Right now at this level, if I were to take a security group that had 5,000 members, it would be, let's say, the size of an ostrich egg. If you go in there and change what we call the last name, say a female that gets married, she changes her name from Smith to Jones, and you make that change, that entire ostrich egg has to replicate around every domain controller and global catalog server in your environment. When you go up to a higher level, you now get what's called linked value replication, LVR, flagged for each of those objects. Now, that's for new security groups or new objects added to existing security groups. So for those 5,000 users, you would actually have to run a script, and in the PDF, there's an article for a guy that actually shows you how to do this. You actually have to remove everyone out of that group and immediately add them right back in to have them flagged as LVR enabled. So that means that if I change that girl's last name from Smith to Jones, just that one piece of information now replicates around your network. So would you rather have an ostrich egg, or would you rather have just that little piece of information? All right? When I go and look at a 2008 or 2008 R2, again, these are the minimum DFL, FFL required to support a 2008 R2 domain controller. Reason this is bad, you can't take advantage of Kerberos using AES 256 encryption. You also can't use fine-grained password policies, and you also can't use, if you go up to 2008 R2 DFL, FFL, the AD recycle bin. And those are some things that you really want to be able to take advantage of. Now, we've looked at the 2003 and 2008, things were set to the minimum, and people never changed them. And you're saying in 2012, you're actually seeing that? Yeah, in the year 2012, I'm actually still seeing these. So what did Microsoft do in Server 2012? If you set up a new one, it sets it to the absolute highest level. You have to go in there and force it down to a lower level. Now, this is where Microsoft is going to play the battle of TechNet articles. And the TechNet article that describes all the advantages you get from going from 2000 to 2003 to 2008 to 2008 R2 to 2012, FFL and DFL, they say there's absolutely nothing gained by going to 2012 DFL. But then there's another TechNet article that says, hey, if you go up to the 2012 DFL, you're now going to be able to take advantage of Kerberos Armory and a couple other things. And then another nice thing is, one of the reasons most people don't ever change the DFL or FFL is because it's a irrevocable change. You make the change, that's it, you're done. You can never go back. With 2012, you can actually go up to 2012 and then back down to 2008 R2. It's the first time they've allowed that. Any questions? All right, one of the next things I'm going to look for are subnets not defined. And this is one of the worst things that you can have in your Active Directory environment for affecting your users and their logon speed. So why are subnets important? Well, they help computers find the closest domain controller, and they also help Exchange find the optimal routing for messaging traffic. So how is a domain controller found? We're going to just look at this from about 34,000 feet. We could actually spend about 45 minutes talking about this one process right here. So a domain controller registers its SRV and A records. The SRV records are going to be things like, I'm LDAP, I handle LDAP, and here's my port. I handle Kerberos, and here's the port for Kerberos. I'm a global catalog server, and here's the port for my global catalog server, and so on and so forth, for Exchange and SharePoint and all that stuff. And then the A record is its IP address. Then the client's going to request a domain controller by providing its site name to DNS. Then DNS is going to use the client's site name to find a DC in that site or the closest site. And then DNS will then provide the IP address of the DC to the client. Now what I find is that most people, most admins never look at their event logs. And I'm convinced most admins don't even know that event logs even exist.
That's right.
So, in the system event log of your domain controllers, every 4-point-something hours, there's an event recorded. It says, hey, for the last 4.x hours, I have handled the authentication for this many IP addresses, this many tens or hundreds or thousands of tens of thousands of IP addresses. What that means is that none of those IP addresses match any subnet set up in sites and services. So what that means, in this process right here, when we come down, the DNS is going to say, I don't have anything for your IP address, so I'll tell you what. Here's every domain controller in the entire AD forest. There you go. It's going to go. The first one that responds, I'm going to use that to authenticate. And in a real life happening, had a customer that had a client that was outside of Chicago, Illinois, that just happened to have a domain controller in Shanghai, China, over a 56K dial-up lease line that just happened to reach its inter-site replication interval time and connected and said, oh, I'll handle that customer or that client. They had 863 group policies coming across a domain controller in Shanghai, China, and I'm sure you can imagine how up-to-date that domain controller was for speed and everything. Sucking all that stuff down. Another thing, once a client has a domain controller, you now have domain controller affinity. So every time it wanted to do anything, where'd it go? They didn't know anything happened until they got their bill for that 56K dial-up line. So, how do we find those? In that event log entry, it's going to tell you, hey, go look and see Windows debug netlogon.log, and if I've reached more than 20 meg in size, netlogon.bat. Look at those files. Once you got that file, we're going to open up Excel, go to data, from text, change the drop down to all files, go down, find your netlogon.log file, and then change it to delimited, click next, unselect tab, select space, click finish, boom, there you go. Now, as a consultant, all I'm worried about is this column down here for the IP addresses. You are probably going to be worried about client names also. You're going to want to know where those client names are coming from. If you're running IPv6, you can reprocess this file and get all the IPv6 information. I'm going to delete every column because if you're on 2003, there's 5 columns. If you're on 2008, 2008 R2, there's just 4 columns. Delete them all the way up to the IP address. And then this isn't necessary, but to me it makes it more readable. I'm going to highlight this column of just IP addresses. I'm going to sort it in alphabetical order. Then I'm going to tell it to remove the duplicates. And then as you can see in this real data from a customer, it removed 544,951 duplicate IP addresses, left them with 745 unique IP addresses from this one domain controller. They had 9. By the time I processed all 9 domain controllers, they had almost 10,000 unique IP addresses. And then, what we're going to do now is we now have a decision to make. As I'm scrolling down through here, do we need just a 10.0 subnet? Or do we need a 10.6 subnet? Or do we need a 10.6.0 and a 10.6.1? Me as a consultant, I can't tell you. Only you know your network well enough to know what we need at that point. And I think they have just told me that it's time for a break, but the next one is very, very quick. So now that we know what subnets that we need, here's one thing I found. The routers and firewalls and web filtering always have all these IP addresses in there because you have to be able to route. You need to be able to filter traffic on that firewall. And if you're using web filtering, you definitely don't want clients getting stuff that they shouldn't be able to get to. But no one ever bothers to update Active Directory. So now that we've got all of those, we're now going to go and take a look at our DNS reverse lookup zones. Because now for every subnet that we created in sites and services, we now need to go and create a reverse lookup zone in DNS. Now, AD does not require DNS. AD will go on forever with no reverse lookup zone ever created. But if you're going to use Kerberos authentication with XenApp, you want reverse DNS. If you want a happy and blissful and successful life within desktop, you will use reverse DNS. And most people don't know this. Web interface needs reverse DNS. Also, vSphere 5 requires reverse DNS. And vCenter Server 5 requires reverse DNS. To list your reverse DNS zones, run this command. If you're on server 2003, you have to install the support tools to get this. It's built into 2008 and on. Run this command, you'll get you a nice list. Compare this list with what you have in subnets for sites and services, reconcile the two. After you do that, it's now break time. Go get your beer. We've covered missing subnets and sites and services and reverse DNS lookup zones. Any questions on those three? Someone brought up the comment that they think that it's possible in 2008 R2 to roll back, once you've up your 2008 R2 DFL, FFL, to roll back to 2008. I've never read that. I'm not familiar with that, but I'll have to check that out to see if that is possible. I've only read it being possible with 2012, being able to roll back to 2008 R2, because it's that one set of TechNet articles talks about. There's really nothing that Microsoft says you gained by going up to 2012, so they allow you to go back, roll back to 2008 R2. Okay, the next thing I'm going to look at that really affects our users is I want to see, are all domain controllers global catalog servers? So what is the global catalog? In this nice, very detailed and boring article from Microsoft, it says the global catalog is a distributed data repository that contains a searchable partial representation of every object in an AD forest. So even if your AD forest has lots of domains and lots of sites and thousands of servers and tens of thousands of computers and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of users and security groups, all of those objects are in the global catalog. Every one of them. Even if you have millions of them, they are there. So what does the global catalog do in the login process? Well, when a domain user logs on interactively to a domain, the contacted domain controller that we had just covered must retrieve information from a global catalog server under the following two conditions. One, the user's domain is Windows 2000 native DFL or higher, which I'm hoping is everyone in this room. In that case, the user might belong to a universal group whose object is stored in a different domain. Second reason it would contact the global catalog server is the user's login name is a user principal name. The user principal name is simply where you've got a long domain name and you want to make it real short, where I can be Amalgamated Biscuit Corporation, and you don't want your users having to type in Sally at amalgamatedbiscuitcorporation.com every time they log in. You could just make a UPN that says abc.com is the same thing as amalgamatedbiscuitcorporation.com. You could also say abc123xyz.com is the same thing. So the UPN has absolutely nothing to do with the actual domain the user resides in an Active Directory. So, since how almost everyone should be in this situation, my bottom line is you need to configure all domain controllers as global catalog servers. But I know, who cares what Webster says? What's Microsoft say? Microsoft says in this article how the global catalog works in their bad English. It is recommended to make all domain controllers be global catalog servers. But I know what you're thinking. Webster, you're forgetting something. What about the infrastructure master? Because everyone knows the domain controller that holds the infrastructure physical role cannot be a global catalog server. Everyone knows that. Boom. Let's think about that. So what is the infrastructure master? Infrastructure master updates cross-domain references and phantoms from the global catalog. What's a phantom? A phantom is a deleted object. So let's think about that. If I'm in a single domain AD forest, there are no cross-domain references or cross-domain phantoms that the global catalog needs to take care of. So every domain controller can be a global catalog server. If I'm in a multiple domain AD forest and every domain controller is a global catalog server, there's nothing for the infrastructure master to do. Plus, if I've gone all the way up to a 2008 R2 FFL, deleted objects are handled completely differently now. And when you go up to there, it renders the infrastructure master useless. It now does absolutely nothing. So there really is no reason, logical reason, you shouldn't make every domain controller a global catalog server. Well, is there a reason you wouldn't want? Well, okay, let's think about that. If I've got a remote site that is on a bad or congested WAN link, you may not want all that global catalog replication traffic going across that bad or congested WAN link, would you? Let's think about that. If I've got a user over here on this side of that WAN link, and I go to log in, and your domain is, say, at 2003 FFL, what happens? It's got to come all the way over here, find a global catalog server, find out, hey, am I in a universal group, or did I by chance use a UPN? Then it's got to come all the way back across that congested or bad WAN link to give that information to the authenticating domain controller. And that's just one user. What if I've got hundreds or thousands of users over here? You are now impacting the logon experience for every one of those users. So my point is, fix your issue on the WAN link and make every domain controller a global catalog server.
What about read-only DCs?
Read-only?
Yeah, if you're deploying RDCs, surely they're not read-only global catalogs, or can they be read-only global catalogs?
Yeah. Yeah. When you do a DC promo, that's one of the options. Well, actually, in 2012, there actually is a check mark. It says read-only. Then the global catalog. There's actually a global catalog box there. And also, one of the nice things about the way they've changed DC promo in 2012 is in all versions prior to 2012, when I run DC promo, and then it starts retrieving all that Active Directory information, what domain controller is it getting it from? Don't know. In 2012, you've actually got a drop down that lists all the domain controllers, and you can say, retrieve the information from this domain controller. So you can make it a local or a close by domain controller. So that is pretty neat. So now how do we find all the domain controllers that are not global catalog servers? Simple. Use PowerShell. You can run this command and it'll retrieve a list and say, hey, here's all your domain controllers that are not global catalog servers. Now, originally, I was told by that young squirt that's already written 4 AD books that you could not use PowerShell without going into bit arrays and changing stuff, and you had to be able to do bit mask arrays, using the .NET framework and stuff like that. And then I found in the Active Directory Cookbook, 3rd edition by Laura Hunter and Robbie Allen, they actually had a section in there that said, hey, here's a line of PowerShell that you can use that will turn a domain controller that is not a global catalog server and make it a global catalog server. I was like, sweet. So I took that, figured out how to make it, to where it would work for an entire domain, and then my friend Michael B. Smith, who's an Exchange MVP and a PowerShell guru, then cleaned it up for me and everything. But the lines of PowerShell are this long, and in order to get it on the screen, I had to make it 4-point font, and I couldn't even read it standing here. So it's in the PDF, and it works. I tested it in my lab. I give you all the test results and everything. So you can actually do that now. The next thing I'm going to look for are connection objects, specifically manually created connection objects. There should be no, zero, zilch, nada, manually created connection objects in sites and services. None whatsoever. So what should be there? I want to see automatically generated, and then this RODC connection, and then RODC connection for server 2012. So why are manual connection objects there, basically because most admins have no idea how the Active Directory Knowledge Consistency Checker, or KCC, works. Microsoft has a very detailed article that if any of y'all are on a flight, I don't know if any of y'all follow me on Twitter, I had a 17-hour flight over here. If any of y'all have any long flights going home, you can save this thing to a PDF and put it on your tablet device. It'll cure your insomnia. You will fall asleep before you're off the runway. This is a very boring article. So, how does the KCC build connection between domain controllers? Well, one of the things that most people believe wrongly about connection objects is that Active Directory is a fully meshed connection topology. It is not. The KCC is simply an application that's called as a DLL on every domain controller, and it just runs as a process. When you boot up a domain controller, as soon as you see the press Control-Alt-Delete the login screen, 5 minutes after that, the KCC will start running. 15 minutes after that, it will run again, and then every 15 minutes after that. So, what you want to do is, when you're bringing up a new domain controller, you want to wait till it gets to that logon screen and just let it sit. Because when does a domain controller become a domain controller? When the sysvol share is created. When is the sysvol share created?
After successful replication.
After the very last gpt.ini file is replicated. If you've got hundreds, or as I've seen in some customer sites, thousands of group policies, it can take the better part of a day for all of that stuff to replicate. And until that very last gpt.ini file has replicated, and then it goes out and verifies everything, then sysvol is created, then you'll get your message in the system event log that the FRS service is now not preventing this server from being a domain controller. If you've ever seen that in the system event log, that's why. So, after it's done that, then it is officially a domain controller, and then all the information about that domain controller is then put into the configuration container in Active Directory. All the domain controllers have access to that configuration container. The KCC on every domain controller is independent. They all have access to the same information. None of them talk to each other. But they will all generate the same replication topology. But now we have a catch-22. We need the replication topology to replicate the fact that we have replication topology, but we haven't generated the replication topology yet, so we can replicate the replication topology. So, what the KCC does is it will overcompensate, and it will just start making connections to all kinds of different domain controllers. Then after it's run, on the next 15-minute interval, it says, oh, I don't need that one, and I don't need that one. And so after about 35 minutes, things will calm down. Then you can go and look in Sites and Services and look at all your connection objects there. If you have any manually created connection objects, delete them. You don't need them. I actually had a case back in April where I was brought in because they were implementing a Zen desktop into a remote data center, and they couldn't get the domain controller in the remote data center to replicate anything. And then when we got in there and looked, none of the domain controllers were talking to each other. And what I found out was that they had gone in there and had nothing but manually created connection objects. They had deleted all the automatically created ones and just had manual in there. Group policy wasn't replicating, DNS wasn't replicating, no Active Directory information was replicating. I finally convinced them that all they needed to do is they could just print screen everything. If they thought they needed them, just print screen all the stuff. Delete them all. 5 minutes later, Active Directory was fine. DNS started replicating, group policy started replicating, all the security group changes and stuff started going across the network. They were able to bring up the domain controller in the remote location, all by simply getting rid of manual connection objects. When you create manual connection objects, you're telling Active Directory you're smarter than KCC. And then, if you create a manual connection object and you make a change on a domain controller, your manual connection object is never updated because it's manual. KCC won't do anything with it, so get rid of them. You don't need them. So what I did is I built, mainly because I have no life, I built a lab with 8 2003 domain controllers, a lab with 8 2008, 8 2008 R2, and 8 2012 domain controllers. Each one, then I'd wait about an hour, bring up the next domain controller, hour, and so as you can imagine, I had no life for a couple of days while I was doing all this. Mainly because I wanted to see what happened. How did all the domain controllers, because when you look at TechNet articles and you look at that Young Kid's book, they always show that one goes to, sorry, hold up, I need some more water here. They always show that 1 connects to 2, connects to 3, connects to 4, connects to 5, connects to 6, connects to 7, connects back to 1. What I found, well, obviously with 1, 2, 3 domain controllers, there's not much there. With 4, I went from 1 to 2 to 4 to 3. But you'll also notice 2 doesn't connect to 3, 1 doesn't connect to 4. And then I go all the way up to my 7 domain controllers, and my 7th domain controller is a read-only domain controller. Now, the KCC has absolutely nothing to do with replication. It only builds the replication topology. It doesn't do any replicating. Replication is also a pull technology. No one ever pushes replication. I'll pull the information from you. KCC has several goals in mind. Within a site, no domain controller is more than 3 hops away from any other domain controller. Even if you have the maximum 1,200 some odd domain controllers in one domain, no domain controller will be more than 3 hops away from another one. Within a site, the KCC will build a replication topology for speed. Between sites, it will build a replication topology to save bandwidth. Now, when I did this for 2003, 2008, 2008 R2, every time I brought up my labs, it didn't matter what order I brought up the servers or anything, I always had the exact same replication topology built. For 2012, your guess is as good as mine. Every time I brought up my lab, completely different replication topology. And to really make things weird, my read-only domain controller built a completely different replication topology than the other 6 domain controllers. I've reported it twice as a bug to Microsoft, but I'm assuming it's because I probably don't adequately understand how 2012 builds replication topology. All right, the next thing I'm going to look for is duplicate DNS entries. So, how and why are unintentional duplicate DNS entries created? I say unintentional because there are intentional. There are reasons to have duplicate DNS entries. I'm looking for the unintentional ones. Like people who have 1,000 PCs and it's time for them to go off lease. And of course they don't bother removing them from the network or the Active Directory or anything. They just pull the plug off, take them out, bring in new ones, plug them up, off they go. If you're using View or Zen Desktop, more than likely you will find duplicate DNS entries. Also, in the southern United States where I live, we have these things called earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, things like that, that can just take out entire towns. And if I've got a tornado coming down my street, I'm not bothering removing computers. I'm getting the heck out of Dodge. If it wants to flatten the building, I'll clean up Active Directory later. And the other reason is because DNS aging and scavenging is not enabled by default. This is one of the things people never change in their Active Directory. If you're going to do aging and scavenging, it must be enabled in 4 places. On the DNS server, the DNS server properties, every forward lookup zone, and every reverse lookup zone. So on the server itself, I'm going to right-click the server, set aging and scavenging for all zones, click the checkbox, and then it's going to pop up with this thing here. Apply these settings to the existing Active Directory integrated zones. For 2003, 2008, 2008 R2, this never worked. Never saw it work. 2012, it's worked 100% of the time. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, right-click my server, go to the properties, and select Enable Automatic Scavenging. Then, for each of my forward lookup zones, I'm going to right-click the zone, go to Properties, go to the General tab, Aging, select my box, and get it set. And then, for every reverse lookup zone, I'm going to go to Properties, Aging, and set the box, and go on. But now, before you do that, you don't have to, but I recommend that you clean up unintentional duplicate entries before you enable aging and scavenging. The reason for that is most people have absolutely no idea what's in their DNS. I've seen people, you go in there and you start looking and they'll have 25 entries labeled ICA. All pointing to Metaframe XP servers that haven't existed on the network since 2004. With old IP addresses that don't exist anymore. So you need to go in there and clean that stuff up. Plus also, you'll also find a bunch of old PCs or even old servers that haven't existed on the network for years. You want to get that stuff out of there. Now there's 2 ways you can do this. You can do a manual cleanup, and then the PDF, I document my 21 steps for how to go in there and manually clean it up, or you can use the sweet, creamy goodness of PowerShell. My friend Michael B. Smith wrote me a nice little script that I still cannot comprehend on to go in there and get all the duplicates. So what you're going to do is run Michael's script and output it to a text file. Then you're going to open up Excel, and then you're going to find the file that you created, tell it to import, change this to delimited, next, unselect tab, select comma, click finish, and boom, there you go. There are your duplicate names right there, and then it will also show you your duplicate IPs. Now, for this live production customer data, you can see my duplicate IP start at row 2639, which means there were 2,638 rows of duplicate host names. This Excel file had over 6,000 rows in it, which meant there were over 3,400 duplicate IP addresses, rows of duplicate IP addresses. Now, do not take this and just start deleting everything in this spreadsheet. Because this happened at the same people that had manual connection objects. Their admin took this and just went in there and just started deleting everything. Well, you have this thing called Exchange that can also have a DNS record for mail, for OA, for OMA, for Auto Discover. She deleted them all out of hospital. Took down the mail. None of the doctors could get mail. Fun. Yeah, you don't want to do that. The next thing I'm going to look for, orphan domain controllers. So what are orphan domain controllers? Orphan domain controllers are VMs that just die, servers that just die, or same thing as with the computers. People say, oh, this is off lease. They just yank the cord from it and take it back to Dell or HP or whoever, and they never do a DC promo down on it, and it's still lingering out there. So, how do you spot an orphan domain controller? Remember, it's that mythical, mysterious thing called event logs. They're screaming at you that I can't replicate group policy. You know, FRS isn't working. You run DC diag, and DC diag takes hours to run because it's sitting there trying to hit every domain controller that exists in your Active Directory, and it's waiting to time them all out. DNS, you're having issues with DNS. You know, that's how you're going to spot them. So how do you remove an orphan domain controller? Well, If all you have are Windows Server 2003, Microsoft has an article, I think it's 20 or 22 steps on how to manually remove orphan domain controllers. Or, if you're on 2008 or higher, and you also have the 2008 plus RSET tools installed, very detailed process. Right-click the orphan domain and active directory users and computers, select delete, you're done. It will clean up all the metadata. It will clean up everything in DNS for you. You don't have to go and spend, hours sometimes trying to clean up 5, 10, 15 orphan domain controllers. Just right-click them all or highlight them all, right-click, delete, done. Yes?
Are there also tools for Orphan Exchange servers?
That I don't know. I don't do Exchange anymore. I stopped doing Exchange a year and a half ago, and I Vulcan mind mellowed all the Exchange knowledge. So I'm sorry, I don't know.
By right-clicking it, then.
Yeah. Or Orphan Exchange usually requires a trip down the ADS edit lane, and I don't like going there.
But then you end up with an unsupported Active Directory.
Yeah, just call Microsoft CSS, PSS, whatever they're calling themselves this year. Let them do it. That's what you're paying them for. All right. Next thing I want to look for is the PDC emulator for the domain configured properly for a time server. So what is the PDC emulator? There are 5 FSMO rows. There are 2 for the forest, 3 for each domain. The PDC emulator is one of those FSMO rows. And of course, we all know that all 5 FSMO rows are all equal because in Active Directory, all domain controllers are equal. In my opinion, the domain controller that hosts the PDC row is the most equal of all domain controllers. Because when you make a change to a password, it immediately goes to the PDC emulator. When you lock out an account, it immediately goes to the PDC emulator. If a user logs in and they fat finger their password, the domain controller will, if it says, oh, this is the wrong password, it's not going to immediately reject the logon. It has to go to the PDC emulator and say, by chance, did this user change their password? By chance, is this account locked out? And the most authoritative source for that information is the PDC emulator. Also, if you're on 2008 or higher and you're going to upgrade your sysvol to use DFSR for replication, the PDC emulator must be online during that process or that process will fail. In Server 2012, if you're going to use the new 2012 domain controller cloning process, your PDC emulator must be a 2012 PDC emulator and it must be online or it will not work. So in my opinion, the PDC emulator domain controller must be the most reliable, the most stable, the most highly available domain controller that you have. And of course, the reason for this slide is the PDC emulator is also the time source for the domain. So how do we configure it? Microsoft has a very long article that explains how to do this. But you really only need 3 things. Oh, and by the way, there's a little Mr. Fix-It on there. He doesn't work for any version of Windows. He has never worked. Never, ever. Don't use them. But we got 3 items that need to be configured properly. The type must be set to NTP and not NT5DS. The announce flags must be set to 5 and not A. And then you must set the external time server. Now, for the US, I'm using servers from north-america.pool.ntp.org. For your country, you can go there and find the time servers for you. Then you also need to have a comma 0x1 space after the end of that. And if you don't put that on there, it doesn't work. Now here's one thing that really baffles my mind. When you are starting a greenfield Active Directory, you're bringing up that first domain controller, and you know it's the first domain controller for a new forest, new domain, which means it's going to be the PDC emulator for the root forest domain. Why doesn't Microsoft ask you for these 3 things? They still don't, not even in 2012. So as soon as you bring up that first domain controller and you reboot, you go look at the system event log. I'm sorry, but this is the PDC emulator for the root force domain, and it's not configured properly to be an authoritative time server. Why didn't you do that during the DC promo process? All right. Now once we've done that, we're going to restart the Windows time service. You can either use this command line or PowerShell. Once you do that, on the PDC emulator, you will now get 2 system event log entries. You will see that it's now receiving valid time data, and that it is now synchronizing from your time source. And then after a little while, on the other computers in the domain, you'll eventually get this in their system event log that they are now synchronizing time with the PDC emulator. Any questions on this? One question I normally get is, can I have more than one PDC emulator in a domain? No. Then they go, well, but how can I make sure if this one goes down that the one I'm going to make the PDC emulator is already configured for this? Well, in the PDF, there's an article I linked to that actually shows you how to set up a group policy that uses a WMI filter that says, hey, for the domain controller that holds the PDC emulator, set these 3 registry keys. And then you can do that. And then if you then move the PDC emulator physical row to another domain controller, reboot the domain controller, it's automatically configured. You don't have to remember to do anything. Yes?
I don't know if it's still the same as 2012, but there was also a registry key to make it an RTS server, a reliable time source. Never did it? Because
no.
Based on the hierarchy of how the time sources sync, with the NTDS kind of things, it is true that you can change it one to NTP, but there is another option to make it also a reliable time source in case of you have Linux devices or other things which are tried to be an NTP server as well.
I don't deal with those.
There is an article for that.
Okay.
Maybe
okay. Now, there is an entire hierarchy, and there is math involved. When a computer comes up, it actually calculates who it should use for its authoritative time source. The PDC emulator, has the highest value, and so domain controllers and other domains will go to the PDC emulator in the domain in the root force domain.
And this article says, to make it really sure, because they don't trust each other, you can create an RTS and then it's the reliable time source for the environment you want to create.
Okay, if you'll email me that, I'll add it to the PDF.
Yeah.
Yes?
To comment on that, I've been in an environment where some admin installed his own Linux box with standby and all that stuff, and that was the primary NTP server for the whole domain after he installed it.
And that's why you need this RTS registry.
Okay. If you'll email me that, I'll add it to the PDF.
Yeah, I will.
Okay? All right. Next thing, domain controller DNS IP settings. And man, this one just chaps my hide. So why is this important? Because this causes most of the problems of all the previous ones that we have seen. One of the reasons is when domain controllers are misconfigured, you create DNS islands. And a DNS island is where this domain controller that's running DNS only talks to itself and no one else. Therefore, it doesn't know about any other changes on any other DNS server in the environment. And that's a bad thing to have happen. Now, Microsoft has this article that explains DNS Silence. It says it's only for Windows 2000. They made changes for 2003 and higher. Bogus. Now, even in 2012, you can still get DNS Silence. So how do I usually find DCs configured for DNS? Like this. An absolute bowl of spaghetti. Now, the reason this is bad is because if I'm coming here and I'm setting up a new server and I'm the admin because we don't have anything automated, and I'm setting up a server, I will probably set this as my primary DNS, and I may set that one as my secondary. And then this other admin's coming over here, and he's going to make this his primary, and he may make this his secondary. And then because none of them are talking to each other, I've just set up 2 servers, and only one DNS server knows about the servers. So I'm on a PC, a management PC, that has this server for primary DNS, and I say, where's new server 1? And it says, host name not found. And you go, huh, Joe, did you add that? Yeah, I sure did. Oh, okay, well, I'll just go here and I'll just add it to DNS here. So now I've got a manual DNS entry over here. And so now, server 1, you go, oh crap, I used the wrong IP address. I changed the IP address. This server knows about it. This server doesn't. This server doesn't. And so now you just got, you know, a bunch of screwy things. So this actually happened my second Active Directory migration. Got brought in for a company separating from a parent company. They'd been trying for 4 months to run a test migration and it never worked. And when I came in, all their domain controllers were configured like this, which caused them to have all the duplicate DNS entries. They actually, I could sit down at this PC and say ping PC1 and come up with an IP address, turn around on this computer, say ping PC1, come up with a completely different IP address, and then come over to this computer, say ping PC1, and get a completely different IP address. They actually had host names that had 21 or more IP addresses. They had IP addresses that had 17 or more host names. I mean, it took all day to fix that.
That's called failover.
It was an absolute nightmare. But once we got that cleaned up, they were able to do their migration and go on. The other way I find things are intentional DNS silence, where people say, well, I only want this domain controller talking to itself. I only want this domain controller talking to itself. Well, it's just as bad as the previous example because no one talks to anyone else. No one knows what's going on. This breaks replication. When you break replication, not only are you breaking DNS replication, breaking AD replication, policy replication, and then nothing works, and then people wonder why their Active Directory is screwed up. You bring in Zen Desktop or View or whatever else into this mix, we get the blame, and it's not our fault, it's Active Directory. Now, should it be? For most environments, you want to pick a domain controller to be primary DNS server. I always pick the PDC Emulator because it should be your most stable, reliable, highly available domain controller. Pick another server to make it secondary. Everyone points to this one, including itself for primary. Everything points to this one, including itself for secondary. And then the 2 domain controllers point to themselves for tertiary DNS. Now what's bad about this is you got 2 teams at Microsoft that don't talk to each other. When you run DC Promo, what happens to the primary DNS? Changes to the local loopback. Now, local loopback should be tertiary. So you have to go in there and manually fix it after the DC Promo team has screwed it up. Or the AD Best Practices Analyzer will complain. And the AD Best Practices Analyzer is correct. DC Promo is not correct. Primary DNS should not be the local loopback address. Any questions on that? Now, when you get into multi-domain, sites crossing domains, and you got multiple domain controllers for multiple domains in a site, things get really, really hairy at that point. So it's more complex. Got to do a lot more thinking in those complex situations. What's wrong with this picture? Other than the fact that it's got my name for the domain name. Well, other than the domain controllers OU, there are no OUs. So where are my terminal servers, RDS servers, XenApp servers, Zen Desktop, PBS? Yeah, and computers. Where are my security groups and all my users? And users. What can you not do on computers and users? You cannot directly apply group policy. You cannot directly apply permissions. So Microsoft has some Active Directory guidelines for us. 1 forest, 1 domain, use OUs for management, use sites to control replication. These 4 items will work for over 99% of all Windows Active Directory-based networks, including hosting networks. So what do OUs give us? Delegation of permissions and application of group policy. Here's just an example OU layout that I stole from one of the Citrix guides. There is no one way to do OU layouts, OU design. It's specific to every environment. What I would do for one customer is not what I would do for another customer. Because some customers, you have server people and you have desktop people. So when you bring in Zen Desktop, the Zen Desktop people don't want those server people handling any of their desktop stuff. And then the server people don't want those Zen Desktop people touching any of those server stuff. So where do you put your desktop controllers, desktop director? Where does it all go? You know, lots of decisions to be made. All right, so for XenApp and Zen Desktop, Citrix has some guidelines here. They've got a XenApp, Zen Desktop best practices, and then they've got eDocs here. Bottom line is, use OUs to segregate your worker groups, provisioning services, XenApp, Zen Desktop, and other Citrix-related infrastructure servers. Now, for some other products, I don't work with these because I'm a Citrix bigot. I only work with Citrix and Active Directory. So what I did is I reached out to some other people and got some stuff. So for Dell vWorkspace, I got some information here. And then all this is in the PDF. So I'm just clicking through here. And all these links, all the information, plus all their notes and stuff are all in the PDF. And then for Res Workspace Manager, this is from Sander Vanderhoek of the Netherlands, from IBM. Gave these to me. And then VMware View from Andre Lebovici, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. That's a hard guy to catch down in an email. All right, so we've now covered 10 solutions to keep failure away from you, because it's not our fault, it's the Active Directory fault. So you're going to check your domain and force functional levels, get off all those old DFL, FFL. You're going to check your netlogon.log and netlogon.bat files for all those missing subnets, and get those subnets from the sites and services. Then for each of those subnets you created, we're going to create a reverse DNS lookup zone. You're going to make sure all domain controllers are global catalog servers. You're going to make sure there are no manually created connection objects in sites and services. You're going to clean up DNS of unnecessary duplicate host names and IP addresses. Clean up your Orphan domain controllers. Make sure the PDC Emulator is configured properly to be the authoritative time source. Make sure all domain controllers have their DNS IP settings configured properly. And then use Microsoft's and other vendors' Active Directory design guidelines to ensure you get the best results from your virtualization efforts. Questions? Okay, if I got my time zone calculation correct, then this PDF should now be live. You can go to my website now and get the PDF, and when you send me that stuff, I'll update the PDF.
I have one tip.
Okay?
Working with Citrix in the data center, create 2 sites. One for WAN, one for LAN.
Okay. He said working with Citrix in a data center, create 2 sites, one for WAN, one for LAN. Any other questions, comments?
When you implement your 2 primary and secondary DNS environment, or where do you put normally your PDC emulator? One of these primary or secondary?
I always make it my primary. Because in my opinion, it will be your most stable, reliable, highly available domain controller.
Okay.
So therefore, it should be primary.
Thank you.
Yes?
In scenarios with the VPN connections, some VPN boxes handle both DNS and IP configurations for the client, so they are not going to connect to the Active Directory. That is bad, isn't it, for the updating of records and stuff?
Well, now, all I'm looking for is what the domain controller
Okay.
said, I authenticated because there was no subnet defined in sites and services. And the thing of it is, I could be a domain controller in Spain authenticating someone who's far away from Spain, Russia, you know. I could be a Russian user authenticating to a domain controller in Spain, only because you've got a subnet missing in sites and services. And that would make for a very slow logon for your Russian user. Any other questions?
How many iterations does the KCC sort of take to say if you've got a WAN that's very hub and spoke like, and you're running a number of reasonably high spec core domain controllers to essentially branch offices out in the spokes, and you left KCC to its own tricks, will it naturally sort of gravitate to only replicating to the hub, or will it try and replicate to other spokes?
You have to, okay, I'm sorry, I did leave this out. The only way the KCC works, the KCC knows absolutely nothing about your network, knows nothing about your LAN, knows nothing about your WAN. You need to create sites. You then need to create subnets. You then match those sites to the subnets. You then have to create site links, so it knows how it can create replication between sites. If there are multiple routes, then you need to go and create a cost for that site link, so it knows which is the most efficient one to use. Okay? And then in that article on AD replication, Microsoft actually has documented in there how long it actually takes to generate the replication topology. And even if you have multiple domains and multiple sites and hundreds or thousands of domain controllers, it will usually take less than 90 seconds to generate a full replication topology. All right, any other questions, comments? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming.